Oh, welcome to the Sharpe Way Show. So happy to have you with me this evening, a little bit past 7 p.m. on the East Coast. And yes, it is a very interesting day today. Some of you have seen me twice already because I'm insane. So I go on far too much, but what are you going to do? You guys just can't get enough of me, and I'm happy that you are here with me this evening. I have a very interesting guest today, someone who is going to be chatting with us about all types of things: human nature, left versus right, individuality, AI, all types of cool things. And I thought this was the right person for many reasons. But the biggest issue that I think we hear on this channel very often is the idea of left versus right. We hear that all the time, right? Oh, this person's crazy left, this person's crazy right. Hear that all the time, back and forth. And I think we try here to the best of our ability to try to not be either of those. I'm sure we still are, but I think we try not to be. So I want to bring on, if I could, someone to talk to us about the idea of far left woke and far right woke. He is a scientist and an author. He's the man himself, Mark Changizi. How are you, sir?
Great to be here.
And if you want to follow him, you absolutely can on Twitter or X. It's at Mark Changizi. And if you're listening, it is MARK, not C, and CHANGIZI. If you are listening, check him out. And all of his details are actually on the show description in YouTube, Facebook, and Rumble. Mark, I have to ask you, most people, when they think of woke, they think only left. People don't think of woke being right. You disagree.
Yeah. I mean, I didn't invent the word. The term has popped up. I'm not sure whether it was James Lindsay or Gummy, like a Gummy Bear, sort of a thinker on there. But I've been arguing against what I deem now and called a woke right, really for the last 4.5 years. Soon after COVID happened, amongst I was one of the early anti-lockdowners. My first tweet on March 10th, trying to calm people down and identifying mass hysteria, sort of, fighting against the masks and a lot of the, not just the physical harms, but a lot of the psychosocietal kinds of harms on masks and other kinds of angles that I thought no one else was talking about. But one thing that quickly happened was that first everybody was pro lockdown, even all sides. Libertarians was pulling my hair out, everybody. But after a couple months, it sort of split up into the typical left-right things, which is, by the way, potentially one good reason to have this sort of constant left-right battle, is that at least you can, when there's a mass hysteria, half of them tumble out to be on the opposite side, which was useful. But some subset of those that tumbled onto my side, instead of identifying it as a mass hysteria, social mania, and of course that means it's top down, but also bottom up. It's everything. It's not just bottom up. Politicians are also at the bottom. They're individuals. They're individuals.
Sure.
Here. So, but a lot of these people instead started claiming that this was a 20-year plan done by, so on and so on. All of this was part of this plan to create they just can create mass hysterias whenever they want. This was a fake pandemic. It's not even, I don't know whether there was truly a virus that displaced flu. I think that's bullcrap. But what it wasn't a disproportionately dangerous, altogether novel. All of that was not the case. These death spikes were due to the human societal reactions and so forth. But they came on, want to say this was a massive cabal that did this to us, and they often were excusing our leaders. There's some of these folks saying the president. I remember his tweet that I know the president of New Zealand. She's a good lady, and it's not her fault that she was tricked by these cabals who pulled the wool over her eyes. I'm like, no, dude, look, now you're starting to excuse most of the people that did this to us, or that are really culpable, for this fictional cabal that started this 20 years ago that doesn't in fact exist. And this is
because you want to pick.
Yeah, go on.
Because we want to pick one side, right? I want to pick my side. So therefore, everyone on my side either didn't do anything and they're innocent, or they were somehow tricked. But everybody on the other side, they were clearly purposefully full of this cabal and horrible and evil, and they were doing everything on purpose. Is that kind of what you're saying?
Right, and those intuitions serve you well. That the opposition, that bad things when they happen at the small scales, or the FBI is chasing criminals who kind of know they're on the wrong side of the law. They have bad intent. They're not. But that doesn't drive societal level evil. Certainly, there is criminal behavior and cover-ups within societal level structures as well. But that's not what drives it. The great genocides, and crimes against humanity are done by groups of people who truly believe they're doing good. It's only when you truly believe you're doing good that you can crush millions of skulls and not bat an eye.
So good.
Right?
Oh, so good, my friend. You're right. The only way you could be that evil is to believe you're being good. That's absolutely true. I want to pull up a piece of it. This is from your YouTube page, which is from your name. And I want to show you how you talk about the woke left versus the woke right. And you use the Nolan chart. So I'm going to pop this up real fast so that we can see it. There we go. All righty. Let me bring this up.
Dr. Mark Changizi here through Science Moment. Today I'm going to talk about left and right and woke left and woke right. And there's often a lot of folks confused about the woke right, and it's something that a lot of us have been talking about. They say they can't be the right because they're authoritarian. Now, there's a confusion in terms of understanding the Nolan diagram. The Nolan diagram is this two-dimensional political positions diagram that you may have seen before.
And for those of you who are watching, you may have remembered last year, I spent a lot of time talking about this diagram. The advocates for self-government are one of the people who now run this, and I've been asking people to go there and take this test, and it's free. You can take it whenever you want at theadvocates.org. You can go over there and check that out if you want to. So this has been around for decades. This has been around since like this 80s. Is that right, Mark? Since the 80s?
I think it might have been even late 70s, but yeah.
There we go. So it's been around for a while.
And on one axis, it's nice if you show it diagonally. On one axis, you have economic freedom. And on the other axis, you have personal freedom. And so when you arrange it in this way, those who want more personal freedom but less economic freedom end up over on the left. And those that want more economic freedom and less personal freedom tend to end up on the right. And so for the typical left-right differences of your regular, the regular folk that are not extreme, it tends to correspond, that is capital left, capital R right, tends to be left and right in this diagram. And you can see that kind of in here in the middle. But when you become more extreme left, what happens is that you don't end up all the way over at the left-hand corner of this diagram. No, what happens is that as you want more and more control, less and less economic freedom, invariably these sorts of political positions end up agitating for less and less personal freedom. So
now, what I want to bring up here is, and this is something that I happen to hold on, let me grab it. There we go. That I happen to know is that when we look at the Nolan, the data we have from the advocates shows a couple of interesting things. To your point, it shows that most Americans are actually moderates, right? The largest group of people, whenever we and this is skewed because we often do this, in colleges, we do it on fairs, but throughout the entire time we've been doing this, the most Americans pop up moderate. Most are not far left or far right or far libertarian or authoritarian. But what we have noticed, luckily, the smallest group of people are authoritarians. That's the smallest group. But sadly, in the last 10 to 15 years, the authoritarian group has grown to exactly your point. From the data that now, the data we gather at the advocates is not scientific, obviously, right? But it is gathered the same way every single year for years. So the trends, I think, are accurate, even if the data itself is not. The trends are accurate. And the trends now are people going towards authoritarianism. It's still smallest one, but it's bigger. And the second piece is people that I've noticed, I've given the test out myself many times. People who pop up authoritarian, Mark, they're not surprised. In other words, they don't go, what? I'm authoritarian. They go, yeah, that's true. Get them. Like they're okay with being authoritarianism. I just wanted to bring that up to you as, please comment if you want.
Well, yeah, my own position on that is that that's not usually the case. And the reason is that that's not usually the case is because once the sociopolitical community comes to have some kind of new righteous rule. So, for example, if you told people that you were violating their civil liberties to force a mask on them before COVID, they would have said, yeah, this is a kind of authoritarianism to put. In fact, it was used in the what's the Cuban the detention center that some of these.
Oh, right. Yep.
This was a paradigm example. There was these prisoners on their way in, and they were on their
Guantanamo.
knees in shackles, and they had face masks
Yep.
on, and they were being
Guantanamo Bay.
to Guantanamo Bay. They were accused of torture because of the mask. The visual of those images of them in masks was taken as a clear sign of torture and a violation of their civil liberties. Now, but once it became part of it became both a membership signal, being in the I care about you and I care about COVID club, and then those socio-political communities invariably post hoc evolve bullshit justifications for their membership signals. They're not just membership signals, but they're virtuous and good. And then once that happens, it becomes like not wearing pants at a restaurant. None of us think that you having to wear pants amounts to a civil liberties violation because it becomes a taboo not to do it. These socio-political communities will evolve their virtue signals to become taboo not to do that. So they don't view it as a civil liberties violation at all. It's like any normal person who would just feel like wearing pants, and you should just wear a mask for the same kinds of reasons. So they often really won't view themselves as authoritarians unless they're super philosophical and they're really, willing to bite these bulls. The average person doesn't, because their own justifications within their community argues that it's no longer a violation of civil liberties at all. It's a basic human taboo. They come up with other complicated justifications for it.
I remember the story of I think I may get it right. I'm not sure. You probably remember it. There's a story of an experiment done with monkeys or apes. I think chimpanzees, maybe, I don't remember, but some form of primate, where they're all like in a room and they dangle a banana or some kind of food for the chimps to get. And when any chimp goes to get the banana, the chimps at the bottom are shocked. So they start pulling the guy down, the chimp down, because every time he goes to get banana, they get shocked. So like, don't do that. We get shocked when you do that. Stop. And then they rotate like one chimp out and put a new chimp in, right? And then they stop shocking, but then whenever the guy goes up, the chimp still pull the guy down, because if the guy goes up, he's going to get shocked. So they pull it down for the new chimp who wants to get the banana. They pull him down. Then they keep rotating chimps out until no chimp has ever been shocked. So no chimp knows why we can't get the banana, but no chimp gets the banana because the chimps have decided you can't have the banana. That's what makes me think what you just said. That reminds me of that story. Do you remember that story? I don't know if that.
I don't remember that story at all. It's great. I still would say that we humans are even more irrational, because sometimes these
we're worse than
signals,
chimps.
Yeah, we're worse in the sense that we create righteous rules that don't even have some historical truth that undergirds them. Right?
Got it. Wow. All right. Let me. I want to bring this back up. I want to put a little bit more of this, if I could. A little bit more of this, if I could.
So instead of it ending up way over there, it ends up falling down into the authoritarian position. Communism in principle could end up way over there, but communism in practice always ends up down at the bottom. It ends up violating both economic and personal freedoms. And the same is true on the right. On the right, often as you get more extreme, it doesn't just continue moving all the way right to the end where you have sort of maximal economic freedom but really low personal freedom. No, it ends up that the more that you want to add, the more that you want to violate personal freedoms, the more that it ends up impinging upon economic freedoms as well. You end up favoring certain kinds of national businesses or industries, or you want tariffs supporting your own companies. You have trade restrictions and subsidies. Typically, as you move farther to the right, you end up not just violating personal freedoms, which is sort of characteristic of that side, but you end up violating economic freedoms as well. So you end up with low on both of these axes. So it's true that people say, no, the fascists who ended up socialists can't be called as a political position on the right because they were in fact socialists, which is a thing of the left. No, there's different reasons, different motivations, different philosophies, different dimensions that can lead to socialism. Fascism was socialist.
So I just thought it was an interesting way you put that out. So now it becomes a horseshoe. But I think the common denominator there, if I could get it right, is that people kind of scare people into believing something in some way, shape, or form. They create some type of theory as to why this is correct or why our side is correct and the other side is bad. And then it becomes, as you've mentioned, some kind of collective hysteria. Am I getting that right?
Well, I think that sometimes it's the collective hysteria, which can be it's a dynamic process. There's suddenly some new thing of interest. Suddenly someone says there's an asteroid coming. There's going to be suddenly a new community that's motivated by asteroid information, and there's all this new reputation. It's like gold in California. Hey, there's gold to be had. There's going to be all this new reputation of people interested in those who have stories about the asteroid, what to do about the asteroid, how to morally or ethically interact with other people, given that there's an asteroid. All of this stuff is going to be this mass, and it could be that there's that newness will create opportunities for new reputation and new growth, reputation in yourself, and social capital opportunities. What is one of the things that can potentially drive these things. But whether it becomes an ill, what that we call the mass hysteria versus just a socio-political community interested in something, can depend upon a lot of the details. Whether, we saw interest in H1N1 and bird flu in 2008 and 2010.
I remember.
Years. It was beginning to sound really social mania-like, and then it just fizzled out and it kind of calmed down. It didn't go viral. So whether things develop this kind of suddenly build up a whole community where there's become one of these things, requires a kind of meme virality, which can't be designed ahead of time. Just like your next tweet, you can't force it to go viral. It depends on the decentralized network responding the way that it happens to do. They have to be ready and willing in some sense, just like the sides of a mountain in terms of whether it's ready to avalanche. So
you've got to be prepped.
Yeah, you've got to be prepped, and you don't have control over that.
Got it. Let me talk to my audience for a second. Dina, I want to say thank you so much for becoming a member, guys. Membership's important here in this channel. I appreciate new members, so please pop on and become one if you can. I also want to ask you if you like what you're hearing, and I know you do because you're listening, so do me a favor, click the button known as Lima, India, Kilo, Echo, yes, click that button. If you click that button, you know the guy, his name is Mr. Rhythm, his first name is Al, his middle name is Gore. That guy loves when you click that button. This way he will share it with other people. If you haven't already shared it, please do so. Repost it, put it into your Facebook group, put it on YouTube, put it in X, whatever the case may be. Please check it. If you want to get your to the front, please do me a favor, super chat me, or if you want to rant me if you're watching on Rumble, have a shot at getting into one of my shorts. That's always good. If you have not selected all notifications when you subscribe, why do you hate the children? Don't hate the children. They're good people. Please subscribe. Follow me in all the good things. If you do want to become a member, please do so at $49 per month. Click that join button. If you're on Rumble and you want to become a member, please do so. Click subscribe. But no matter what you do, please do me one small favor. Mark has given us some great time, some great energy. Follow him on Twitter. He's at Mark Changizi. And if you're listening, this is MarkChangizi. Let me grab a couple comments if I could. Let me grab a couple of these. And where is it? Here. Phil says, wake up the like button. He's right. Yes, he should do that. See, he knows what's going on. I do appreciate that. All righty. People do like it. Mike says, so woke right is conspiracy theory and anonymous posts. Not sure I understand the definition, and several of the theories have been proven true, like lab creation. And let me go into one more. Mike has two of them. I'm going to grab both. He says, woke can be defined as forced ideology that increases hierarchy and obedience. What defines this woke right group? Please, if you want to touch that, Mark.
Yeah, I mean, there's a bunch of symmetries between them that they're not the same, but they're kind of opposites, and they're both approaching, they both have some kind of similarities. But one thing that is certainly there's a conspiracy theory side, and I mean that in the derogatory sense, and in the sense that people use that term in a derogatory sense, to the woke right. And I think that there's a conspiracy theory opposite sense that people don't often identify with the woke left. And I think they're opposites in the following sense. There's an internal, it's as if the woke left often, when there's good in the world, they are looking for a cabal. I call it the God cabal, that in order to explain it, good can't happen by virtue of decentralized networks to free market. You can't, good, and in fact, it's really super counterintuitive. How could all this good can happen by virtue of free markets? It's just a bunch of people greedily doing stuff. Same for free expression. If you want to have the truth, if you want a society that's where truth is kind of we're getting closer to the truth, surely you have to just have the centralized government check for misinformation, right? That's a pretty good argument, actually. It's really intuitive. But in fact, that's the terrible way.
Right.
So
right.
when good things happen, it is due to centralized cabals. And that's the left is characterized by that. That's one of their hallmarks. And the woke right, though, is very similar, but it's the opposite. When the average person, whereas the left, the average person is typically not very good, but when the good happens, a cabal did it. The right is often, the average person is typically pretty good. When there's evil, it's because an evil cabal did it. Evil cabals are the ones who do it. There's and so they look
evil
for
cabals versus good cabals.
Good cabals, and I think that explains a lot of the symmetries, but different but opposites. For where it's Bill Gates who's
it's funny
not just culpable, but mustache twirling sense of culpable, which is a totally different thing.
Right. No, it's funny when you say that, because you look at what people often call TDS, Trump derangement syndrome, right? Orange man bad. Trump is terrible. He's the individual. He's so bad. And they can't stand him. The opposite, though, I think you find a lot of Republicans now saying just Democrats are bad. Like they're all just bad. It's a whole, they swapped in that regard, I think, when it comes to our politics today. Dave says the politicians in both parties took advantage of the pandemic. Democrats called people racist if they said it originated in the lab in Wuhan. Republicans suggested that all vaccines cause, I don't want to say it on YouTube because they'll get canceled, the spectrum. I'll say that. There we go. Cause the spectrum. How about that? I think Dave is kind of right now, right? Both sides decided that the other side did something weird or bad or crazy. Is he right or no?
Well, I mean, I've certainly been arguing both. My biggest opponents here were, the lockdowners during the whole COVID thing. But I have practically no followers that are lockdowners. My followers are people that were also anti-lockdowners. So I was, in fact, often arguing against some of the extreme. I call them the plandemicers. That these are the plandemic people who just think that it was all pre-planned, and that and they're missing the entire point of totalitarianism and crimes against humanity and genocides. They are done by these sociopolitical communities that are enforcing their authoritarianism in a decentralized manner. If you want to understand all the things that happened in the Cultural Revolution in China, and my country, my wife and myself were Iranian. In Iran, the Islamic Revolution, and in Nazi Germany, these are done by virtue of these bottom-up sweeps that bring people into power, and it's enforced on the street. This is not just a small cabal that does this top-down to people like in some sorts of movies where that's not how it happens. And so a lot of these folks that I've been arguing against have been folks that are nominally on my own side, but I don't believe that they're on my side, because they're in fact scaring away everybody in the middle on the fence, because there's no such thing as viruses. I was like, okay, even if you thought that you were so sophisticated to enter the world of virology and argue against viruses, and I'm not that kind of person, that's not the time to do it. You said, because you can say, look, even if there were viruses, like 12 hierarchical arguments about why what they're doing is totally wrong and immoral and unethical, and it doesn't even empirically make sense. You don't jump to that there's no such thing as viruses as your first thing. That's just doesn't make any sense to do. So I think that that kind of viewpoint has completely undermined a lot of folks like me, and it made it a lot harder to argue during COVID against the interventions.
But I have to ask, if we do it so much as humans, if that's one of the things that we do, was there some, or is there still some value to us being this way? Is there some cultural value to us going, yes, we're all correct, and those people over there are evil, and yes, it's a conspiracy, and they're the good cabal or the evil cabal? Is there some value to that in humans?
Well, I mean, if there was value for it, you'd be looking for explanations at the level of hundreds of people and tribes where we would have evolved. So certainly, even if you can find a story that makes sense in those circumstances, the situation where you have these throngs of people of hundreds of thousands, millions, and in this case it was 8 billion people. All of that's certainly gone haywire, whatever it was. So you can imagine in small, when you want to really fight an enemy and your entire existence is potentially at stake, when you've got your 300 against some neighboring 300 tribe that found you, it might be a good idea. It might actually have led to better survival to have created all these post hoc justifications for how they're out, and they often are out to get you in that case, because they really are conspiring to go kill you off, right? So some of those sorts of narratives that people tell and placing people in unclean out groups that are definitely dangerous may have made evolutionary sense. But those kinds of small scale sociopolitical systems at the small scale don't allow you to understand what happens at these massive scales. And this is one of the interesting things, and it blows my mind. If you ask the average person, if they're looking at starlings, you know, like the flocks of birds, right?
Yep.
And there's these beautiful starlings with a million of them. They're like gyrating the sky, and it's beautiful. And I ask them, okay, which one of those starlings is telling them to do that?
Oh.
Right? Which one? And they have good intuitions. They'll say, oh, no, it's not. There's obviously not a single starling or even a cabal of starlings that's doing that. It's fucking complex, and I don't know how they do it. They'll show humility. But you suddenly turn those million into a billion humans, which are deeply complicated with massive cultural histories, and suddenly they're sure that it's all controlled by a small cabal.
Right.
No, that's
Yes.
not how complex systems work. At those scales, your intuitions suck, right? And even me and biologists, evolutionary biologists, physicists, mathematicians like me, who were experienced in this stuff, we have better intuitions, but we still don't know what to actually predict because it's really freaking hard. But they're walking around with 100% confidence that they understand the throngs of humans that in all of the dynamics that are happening, none of which is what makes sense at normal everyday scales.
There we go. Greg says, I'm on the right, but during COVID, I thought the talk about sensors in the stick, the magnet thing, remember doing magnets? It was, that thing was a distraction compared to real topics like the stick injuries. I completely agree. If someone's being injured by that, that's real versus they're censoring and now they can read our minds or whatever was the thing there, right? I think he's with you on that one.
No question.
So,
There's magnetics, they're tracking us with the things, they are depopulating, which would be the most absurd way to depopulate. Even at the biggest estimates of the deaths that were involved would be a crazily tiny fraction. And we're depopulating ourselves in every country that's first world anyway. We're just massive civilization population collapse. There's no reason to go out of your way when we're organically depopulating ourselves at this moment.
Also true. Garrett has given 5 Sharpe Way memberships. Thank you guys. You guys want to jump on a membership train, please do so. I appreciate it. Remember the rule though. If you made $10 million this week, if any of you did, you may not take one of Garrett's free memberships. If you made $10 million, you have to actually pay the $4.99. Don't be cheap. You made $10 million. If you only made $9 million, you can take the free membership. But $10 million is the number. Once you make that, you may not take Garrett's free either. Thank you again, Garrett. You are the man. I appreciate you coming through in a clutch, hooking us up with some more amazing ones right there. I do appreciate that. So let me then move to the next piece if I could then. A lot of this, we believe these conspiracies or these groups or these cabals, we believe it. And it's not like these are people who are dumb, right? It isn't an intellectual piece. People who are smart believe, people who aren't so smart believe, high IQs, middle IQs, it doesn't matter. People believe. I remember hearing a story once that someone said, oh, what did I forgot. I read it in a book, I think. I read it in a book. It was an influence book, maybe by maybe Dr. Robert Cialdini or Kevin Hogan, someone like that. And they're saying that people who are in cults, the IQ of a cult member is actually higher than the IQ of the average American. And when they tried to research why that was true, like, why would that be true? It doesn't make any sense. I thought cult people are dumb, right? And that we all told it, you're dumb to be in a cult. And what the researchers thought, their theory was that if your IQ is very high, you think you're too smart to be fooled. So that if you believe the thing, if it makes sense to you, you go, well, it makes sense to me, therefore it must be real because I'm super smart. And then other people who are smart go, oh, that guy's smart. So if he believes it, it must be true. And then it collects other smart people who all believe there's no way that they could be fooled. Is there any truth to that when it comes to this same idea of collective hysteria, that the smart people will jump on board regardless of whether they're smart or not? That doesn't matter about your IQ or your intellect.
Well, no? Yeah, I certainly am fairly confident that it doesn't have anything to do with it. It could even have a positive association, which I pointed out, many times in the last 5 years, but I didn't have data to support that, for COVID. But I don't, there's a lot of folks that when they look at sociopolitical communities gone bad, right? Whether it was Nazi Germany or the Cultural Revolution, they say, well, they're sick. The people, in fact, the very words
Yes.
mass hysteria is a little confusing, or mass psychosis, because people say, well, the individuals are psychotic within it. No, the whole point of the term mass psychotic or something like the mania or whatever the second word is the mass in front of it is trying to say, no, they're sick, but it's at the level of the whole. The individuals are fine. That's what's so frightening about it. The individuals are fine. They're in fact, even there's regular illnesses, eating disorders are like this. Eating disorders, the individual girl, mostly girls, and maybe 20% guys, they're often this is a socio-political disease. And individually, they'll argue you into a corner as to why it's okay to become a skeleton. And like, you can't argue them out of it. Because they're super sophisticated kids. They're perfectly high IQ and maybe even higher than average IQ, right? It's the illness is at the social level. It's a social disease. I remember, what was that? And that old movie. Anyway, the individuals are fine, and people often say, well, a lot of these leaders are they're sociopaths or they're psychopaths, and there's these theories for going back for decades. I said, no, they're not sociopaths. They're regular folks, and they're drinking the Kool-Aid just as strongly or more strongly than everybody else in a socio-political community. And by the Kool-Aid, I mean, once you're in, I think I could have become a COVID cult person, but I'm by nature aloof. In fact, I used to, when I was a professor, I had all these principles for how to come up with new discoveries. And as a theorist, I always move on to new fields. And it's always been important for me to be aloof. I don't show up to conferences. I don't become the guy that's going to the same conference and, looking at Doug and Susie as the people 20 years older than me that are famous in that little pond. And then I become a little bit famous, and then everybody's like treating me with all this respect. And then you only the ideas in your community seem important, and the ideas in that neighboring community seem stupid. It looks like that New Yorker map of New York City, which it fills most of the earth. And then the rest of the earth is that's what your field becomes. So I've always been.
That's not accurate. Wait a minute. Yes, it is. That's totally accurate.
And it's been important to me to remain aloof scientifically, but I always sort of ended up remaining aloof even politically for that reason. But if I had been sitting in academia and art, and I'm always libertarian, so I never fit in there anyway. But if I'm surrounded by those folks, then when they start coming up with these arguments, they evolve, as I said, justifications, post hoc justifications. You already believe this particular thing, that masses are important to wear, and they will evolve, sociopolitically evolve, better and better memes, justifications, 1,000 observational studies within 2 months were suddenly generated that were true, real publications, full crack publications for why masks totally worked, when all the studies prior to 2020 showed that they basically didn't work. It becomes justified, and I'd be surrounded by all this because the people that are high reputation people in my communities would be telling me, and that's why I believe 99.9% of what I believe. I happen to have a couple dozen discoveries as a scientist, but all of the other million stuff, it's because I trust the people in my network. And if I was embedded deeper in the same network that started bouncing as one, well, I would have been bouncing as one along with them. Why wouldn't I?
Yeah, I mean, it's an important piece that I try to bring up, and I think I do it here in this show. I think I do it in my world. I try to bring people from all different types onto the show, all different people, so that I'm not just in my own bubble. I mean, look, I'm still human, so I have a bubble, but I try to not be just in a bubble. I try to make sure I'm out in other things so I can, see other ways. I love that. I think what I think is that one of the best ways you cannot be taken advantage of, or to defend yourself against taking advantage of, is recognizing how easy you can be. There's one thing I used to teach when I don't really do much teaching as I used to, but when I used to teach influence and marketing and branding, that kind of thing. And I would talk about the 6 laws of influence from Dr. Robert Cialdini. And I had a whole system of what they were. And I would say, this is years ago when everyone used to watch the buying channels, right? When you go on and watch, the TV channels where you go buy your jewels or whatever the case may be. And what I would say is, here are the 6 laws of influence. These guys on QVC, right, the shopping channel, they use all of them. Let me show you how they use them. Now go watch. Go watch with this here and watch a show that you would normally not buy. So, like, if you're not a fisherman, watch the fishing rod show, right? If you don't like jewelry, watch the jewelry show. Watch the show that you are not naturally inclined to buy the thing. And have my list in front of you when you watch it. Watch for at least 20 minutes. And here's what I guarantee you. At the end of that 20 minutes, you will say at least one thing. That's a good gift. You will say that to yourself. And I'd come back next week and every single person would go, Larry, you were right. And I said, that's your defense. It doesn't matter how smart you are. It doesn't matter who you are. We're all susceptible to being influenced. I teach this and it affects me. It doesn't matter. We're all. And I think that's the piece that I've always tried to do. That's why I do things like this. I try to show people the inner workings that we can all be affected. I feel like that's a good way of having this conversation. Am I off on this?
No, I mean, you're right. And I would say in the case of the salesman, they are, of course, consciously trying to sell you something. And they know,
Sure.
and they are either explicitly or implicitly have come to be, selected for that. They come to have those half a dozen sort of techniques, even if they haven't learned about them. They sort of, just the good ones stay in practice because they ended up using this. But in socio-political communities, the people that are arguing these sorts of viewpoints and spreading these ideas have no ill intent, have no intent of just making money from you at all. They are genuine, right? Occasionally they can be, there's always some criminals. I think Fauci was actually covering up. It wasn't 100, but for the most part, these people are genuine when they tell you what they're telling you. They truly believe, and that makes them infinitely more convincing. And the level of convincing isn't just because they believe, but the socio-political community, it's not just, like if I did something wrong and you say, well, you're having trouble, you're trying to personally rationalize it. We all do that kind of thing. But when a whole community rationalizes it, it is a much more complicated bubbling process in terms of how the best ideas for justifying their ideas they already believe in spread. And then it gets added on and more complicated and justified. All the holes are taken out of it so that it's really, really powerful meme, easy to spread, very hard to argue against, is what gets selected for. So they get highly bulletproofed, great ideas, like bullshit, but they're great ideas in the sense that they work really well and they spread across brains. They're easy to communicate. That's what gets selected for. And it's almost impossible to be immune to it because it's being designed more strongly than any human alone would be able to design them for this.
But then doesn't that tribalness, doesn't that expert, right? Which I would say an expert in today's world is usually someone who has a lot of, I guess, maybe social capital with some people, right? I listen to Larry Sharpe or I listen to Mark Changizi and I trust them. So when Mark says something, that's got a lot of weight, right? Because I listen to him, I watch his stuff, I read his book, right? So he's got a lot of weight. And, Greg says something, I go, Greg doesn't have a book. I'm not sure if I trust Greg, right? But then Larry says something I believe, or worse, I don't like Larry. I think he's a terrible guy. So when Larry says something, that's got less weight. Doesn't the kind of social capital, can't that either reinforce or even defend us against that?
Well, I think under normal circumstances it does, because my network of high reputation people, varying reputation people, are typically providing somewhat independent viewpoints and judgments, right? And so that's great that by having a bunch of people that had different judgments, I can get a better take, an objective take. But when something goes viral, in the sense that we understand, it goes viral, suddenly these independent viewpoints are no longer independent. Something has gone viral in such a way that it starts to, and this happens in certain kinds of emergent systems, things that were like, you've seen you just put a bunch of pendulums on a piece of wood and you just start them at random times, but because the wood is slightly rocking, you can put them on two little cylinders. So because the wood is slightly moving, then even though they're all different, by the end, all five of them are doing the same. So that there's lots of things like this where you end up with synchrony happening in an ill way in the group. And now you're in your group of independent people. And if they all 17 was telling you one thing, you would say, well, that's a really good argument. If 17 different scientists and they're little, on different islands, so to speak, tell you that's a pretty freaking strong argument. But if it turns out it's not independent at all, they're all from the same lab, it's not a strong argument at all. It's just it's effectively one opinion. So when these sickness this illness of social manias or mass hysterias are because the system has come to have few degrees of freedom. And it's really one voice you're hearing, and each of you is still thinking that it's many voices, and so it starts to spread. And that's the kind of illness that happens in these social manias.
I remember the media has been doing that for a while. The first station that did it well was Fox News. Then all the rest copied. Initially, it's probably maybe late 90s. Fox News would start in the morning show and say something like, someone would say, "Hey, did you hear? I think Larry Sharpe is 6'8". Larry Sharpe is 6'8". Wow, that's crazy. I didn't know that was true. Okay. And then the next show would come on and someone would go, "Did you hear people are talking about Larry Sharpe? He's 6'8". Oh my God, you heard that? Then the third show would come on. People are talking about this. Larry Sharpe is 6'8". I'm not 6'8". But anyway, and then by the time you heard it, you're like, "I've heard this 3 times. Larry Sharpe must be 6'8". He must be a basketball player."
Right.
But it's the same people on the same channel who just heard the first guy say some rumor, and they just keep saying it. And by the time we're done, you've heard it 25 times during the day. And then now all the shows do that. But that was a thing they used to do consistently. This is kind of what you're talking about, right?
Yeah, except that everybody's doing that. Nike is doing that. Every PR firm, every foundation, every individual, we're all tweeting our kinds of. There's literally hundreds of millions of voices that are trying to play the game of make my idea go viral, right? So you can do worse ways of trying it. There's better and worse people at it, but it's still not the case that any of these things has those kinds of effects just whenever you want. Occasionally, when the network is ready, when the side of the mountain is prepared just so, then the right kind of idea thrown into it can suddenly make everything slide. But anybody else that would have said the same idea at the same time could have made everything slide as well. These are not things that you can, if you're the one that makes it go viral, you're pretty much just lucky that you made it go viral. It's not really you at all. It was the state of the system was ready for that kind of idea. And Larry being, 6'8" may not have been the idea but some other thing that they could have said about you, it might have gone, it could have exploded. You can't decide. No one's smart enough to figure these things out of what the network is ready for.
I'm glad you said that, because Greg quotes the Bible, Romans 12:3. "Do not think of yourself more highly than you ought, but rather think of yourself with sober judgment in accordance with the faith God has distributed to each of you." Nicely put, Greg. I do appreciate that. So kind of what you said. There we go. Kind of what you said. Greg was already feeling it. Liberty Lady says, "Larry will talk to anyone. That's why I like Larry. Never afraid of a conversation." Thank you, Liberty Lady. I do appreciate that. That is very sweet. I'm very happy about that. So let me walk down the next road. You just said that these ideas can be bulletproofed, they can work. But I think what you see in governments now, obviously China's the obvious one I'm gonna bring up, but I'm sure they're not the only one, who are trying to create some type of system that they have a better chance of creating the meme or controlling the meme or monitoring the meme with things like social credit scores, which things like using AI to watch people and to kind of control their their actions. Is that related? It feels to me, now this is just my feel, so I could be totally wrong. It feels to me like those two are related. It's like China is trying to control what you just said, that the government of I should say China, it's the government of China. The CCP is trying to control that. Are they related or no? Is that just me being a conspiracy theorist?
Oh no, I mean they're definitely trying to control it, and there's been lots of well-meaning people in the United States and in the West have suggested such ideas. And I've one of my Science Moment series on my channel was social credit systems aren't bad because they're good. What's bad is centralized social credit systems. Because what do you think reputation is? Social currency is a social credit system. The free expression, public marketplace of ideas depends upon reputation. When I say things, the more strongly that I say it and confidently, the more social capital I'm putting at stake. If I say, well, I think this, but I don't really know, then I'm not really putting anything at stake. If I say, Larry, you don't know what you're talking about, right? Then I'm showing disdain in you. That's also pushing a lot of chips. But if I say, I really like what you said, that's very different. The entire notion of a free expression the entire notion of a public square rests on social credit systems, but it's done organically because in the ways that we evolved, we emotionally express our very emotional expressions. This is my book, well, the previous book with Dr. Tim Barber, Express the Human, is about why we have emotional expressions, why we have the ones that we do, why they function, interact, and they're exactly the language that animals that wouldn't have real language like we have today, they're exactly the signaling system that you have to negotiate, to compromise, to sort of to talk and haggle and say, I want you, but you do that by pushing in. It's like poker. Two people at the table can never speak, and at the end, they can decide that someone has better cards than the other without anyone ever showing their cards, right? They've engaged in a negotiation. The only signals that they gave was pushing in certain amounts of chips. That's in fact how emotional expressions function. And that even when I'm talking now, I'm not just talking like this the entire time where I'm not. No, everything that I'm saying is mostly the confidence levels is not saying that I believe Larry with a significance of P less than 0.01. No, I'm saying I'm conveying my confidence levels by virtue of the manner in which I emotionally express. And in doing so, I'm sometimes putting a lot of stake, depending on what I say. Sometimes I'm saying I don't really know, and I'm putting a little bit. And that will affect me later, because if it turns out I was saying bullcrap, if this network is functioning well, I will get dinged. I will lower in reputation. So it's not that social credit systems are bad. We need them. The marketplace of ideas relies on it. Free expression relies on it. You cannot have a free expression public square if every time you say something, no one ever remembers who you are, that you're truly anonymous, not just pseudonymous, like with the funny name that you've always kept for 15 years on Twitter, where you do care. But but if you're truly anonymous and no one, you can't retain the same rise or lower in time, then there is no such thing as a public square, and we're not moving closer to the truth over time. But what you don't want is any kind of centralized system. It should be in the individual heads as to what of the other people's reputations are. It's distributed across the heads. Like, this is an interesting thing. I can show you how rich I am or poor I am. What do I say? Here's my bank account. Or here's my cool car, or whatever it might be. Can I show you my reputation? I can't show you my reputation. Do you want to know why? It's because it's not in any place. It's distributed across the brains of millions of people. And it's that distribution across those brains where my reputation and where your reputation lies. And that's where it needs to be. It can't be centralized at some government or at some big tech company that the government is paying. That's super dangerous, and that's not how it works.
But what would happen in theory, right, is China would actually go against what you just said. The Chinese government would say, no, you're incorrect, Mark. We're going to rank these people, and we're going to post it someplace, right? You can go onto whatever, reputation.com.china or whatever that's going to be, right?
Which they
and
already
look
do.
And see, oh, Mark, you ranked number 3 million, whatever. We know. So they're going to say that. The question is, though, if the system of our life begins to respond to that, and what I mean by that is, because the Chinese government, or any government, I'm saying China because they're doing it, but American government, any government, decides that I rank here in their centralized repository of reputation, I therefore am allowed to buy a better car, or live in a better neighborhood, or go to a better school, or get more money, or whatever is the way they do it. Or if I have a really low one, I don't get to have banking, or I have to ride a bicycle, or whatever. Wouldn't that eventually make that centralized repository actually real because of how it would function in society? Or am I wrong?
Yeah. I mean, no question, it would be real. It amounts to a massive censorship, because it would be a centralized censorship, effectively, even though it would be called. This is just another way of describing a centralized censorship, where it's rather than specifically kicking people off of, let's say, Twitter, or forcing Twitter to, you would just, you're perfectly fine. You can stay there, say whatever you want, but your ability to buy bread or cheese will be influenced by what you say, right? So this is just another elaborate form of censorship. But the organic, because a lot of people I hear it's like social credit systems are bad, and I think they, of course, I feel like it's a teaching moment. Reputation is a social credit system, and we rely on it. We don't need another social credit system. And that's only going to be one that's going to be wrecking the free market, not the one that in fact undergirds it.
It's funny. I do this often when I speak at libertarian conferences. I'll walk up and I'll say, hey, everybody, who here is against universal health care? And a bunch of hands go up. I go, so if I had a privatized system that allowed voluntary, that allowed everyone to be covered, you'd hate it? They go, what? No, you don't actually hate universal health care. You're not against it. You're against this. You're against centralized control.
Right. Right.
And I think you've just kind of said that. Right. We're not actually against social credit scores. We're against centralized, controlled social credit scores.
Yeah,
right.
And
That's the issue.
I'm not against, yeah, for the similar reasons it doesn't come out. I'm not against little c communism, right? If someone wants to put together a kibbutz and the kibbutz is 300 people, no problem. If it's 300 million people, good for you. If you got 300 million people to sign up, that's good on you. But so sure, similar kind of thing. But I would say the difference is that even, and I don't think little c communisms with 300 million people is going to work very well for humans. I think that's probably a terrible idea. But in fact, free markets and free expression relies on these sorts of currencies moving through them. And that's what makes it such a brilliant system. And we don't want to mess with it. We want to embrace that.
Yeah, well, the other issue, though, I think is what you just said. The Amish is a good example of that, right? There's over 300,000 Amish in America. So people are, and it's growing. Like the Amish community, I have it in New York. The Amish community is growing throughout the country. So I think, and that's kind of little c communism, voluntary. You can go there if you want to. You don't have to. It's up to you. I think that's true. Let me talk to my audience real fast. Rick says, I think we need to tolerate maybe political correctness in many, if not most cases where we have been using the term woke. I'm not sure what you're saying. Oh, okay. So yeah, he re-put it. I think we need to use intolerant political correctness instead of woke. That's what he meant. That's not bad.
Well, I mean, certain ideas spread because they're punchy,
Yes.
So that's at the end of the day, woke works, and I think woke works against the right, not just because of a whole bunch of symmetries, some of which I've written about, but it's also punchy as well. And so it just, but that's part of what makes things go viral in terms of terms and makes them stick. But.
So you have connected emotion and language in a lot of things you've talked about. And I think most people would think, oh, well, we made language to tell people our emotions. Is that true?
Yeah. So no, I mean, language. We're certainly perfectly capable. In fact, we're much more capable to tell people our emotions with the intonation of our voice, the prosody of our speech, with our facial expressions, bodily gestures, everything that we're doing. It's often said like, we've got speech, and then we have a little bit of icing of it, of emotional intonation on top of it. No, I think it's the other way around. Mostly, we're conveying all of this emotional expression, and it has a little bit of propositional content riding along with it. Of course, it's not either of those. You need both. But if you have a speaker up there and they're just straight talking flat like the Stephen Hawking computer voice, there's effectively nothing being conveyed because you have no idea whether he's confident or he's not, and no one's going to walk out and follow him to go fight the bad guy or whatever it might be. The emotions are entirely conveyed without the need for language in terms of the grammatical things whatsoever. The reason that we evolved language was for just hosts and hosts of other kinds of reasons. My research in language really isn't so much about the specific kind of content that language conveyed. My research was concerning how is it that we came to have language at all. And I don't think we evolved language, and I don't think we certainly didn't evolve writing. My story for these things is that writing, for example, we know that most of us have great-grandparents or great-great-grandparents that were illiterate. And writing only goes back hundreds or thousands of years, depending on which ones you're looking at. We definitely don't have brain areas that evolve for reading. But we read so much, so quickly, so early that it's almost as if it's an instinct. But it's not an instinct. It can't be an instinct. And the reason that it works, this is a discovery of mine from 20 years ago, it's because writing systems have evolved to look like nature, to look like the kinds of contour conglomerations that happen out in the world. So you can actually go out and measure which kinds of letter shapes, contour interactions happen in real world scenes of opaque objects. And then you can ask, okay, the ones that are more common and more rare, how does that compare to the similar letter shapes that you find across writing systems? And the ones that are more common in nature are also the more common ones in writing. It's not about how complex they are from an abstract math perspective. It's just, if they're more common in nature, then your brain evolved to see them, in which case writing systems culturally evolved to preferentially look like what you're good at seeing, namely like nature. And the same argument applies for language, which is hundreds of thousands of years older, but it's also a cultural invention, not an instinct. So I'm arguing against Chomsky and Pinker
Yeah.
here. It's not an instinct. This is in my book, Harness, How Language and Music Mimic Nature.
Yeah,
and
you bring up music too with this too. You talk about the idea of music also with this. Yes.
So on the speech side, speech evolved, culturally evolved, to sound like solid object events, auditory events of just solid objects. And when you work out the sounds of solid objects, well, solid objects, that was a door over there, right? There's hits. Well, that's like plosives, puh, cuh, tuh. And then there's slides when things slide, like, all right, they're like fricatives, like, and then when something slides or hits, the objects ring. Those are sonorants, which are like vowels or like Y and ya and wa and things like this. And it's always both. It's a hit or a slide followed by a ring. That's the fundamental nature of all sounds in the environment. Well, what does that sound like? That's a syllable. Syllables are, and then your mouth, and this is just one of 50 different kinds of, you work out the grammar of what solid object events sound like, and then it turns out to match the combinations of phonemes that you find across languages. And you're, the guy from, what was it, Police Academy, who can make all these crazy.
Oh, that guy. Yes, he was amazing. Yes.
Right. We have tremendous capability to make all kinds of sounds which go way beyond hits, slides, and rings. But for language, it culturally evolved to sound like that because we're only good at auditory processing of that stuff because that's what nature's sounds and events are built from. So the idea is that language, and certainly writing, is not part of our human nature. These are our human 1.0 selves only had emotional expressions. But we later culturally evolved these things to harness our existing non-language brains and trick the brains, trick those brains into thinking they could read and speak and process. But we're not really processing language so much as we're processing language which has tricked itself to look like nature. That's the idea.
Got it. Shelley says, thanks for being a member, Shelley. She says, people who have brain injury and communication issues, oddly, music and writing are two extremely good rehab tools. That's interesting. So music and writing are good rehab tools for people with brain injury? I wasn't aware of that. It seems to make sense. Is that real?
Certainly, my ex-wife was a neurologist for 20 years marriage. And so it's certainly something that comes up in those fields at all. I'm not, I study the design of the brain and then the design of cultural evolution for the brain. But neurologists study the broken brain. And it turns out that my ex-wife and I were always looking at things from opposite points of view. And it's almost completely different ways of thinking about it, the way things break versus the way things are designed. Yeah.
So I want to then move to the AI piece, right? Because if they're going to create this central repository reputation, they're going to require AI. And AI, to your point about, the way it is now, it is starting to be able to mimic those emotional cues, the way that it's mimicking us in a way that feels like it's real, right? The AI girlfriend, the AI boyfriend, the AI buddy who speaks in a way that we feel is real, like that movie Her from several years back where the guy falls in love with the computer program. That's happening now, right? So while some guy or gal who can't find a boyfriend or girlfriend they want can go now find it online, either through a robot or their phone or whatever is the way, isn't government going to use AI to be like, I'm your best buddy. Do as I say. Listen to what I want you to do. Isn't government going to do that too? Isn't AI going to be our detriment? Isn't AI going to destroy us in this way? Basically, what I'm saying is, isn't AI basically the Terminator?
Well, I just actually wrote a little piece today that was on this. Look, I'm coming at it from a different angle than not directly answering your question. Look, imagine a bunch of creatures that had a lot smaller memory than us, and all the time in their environment, they still have to do multiplying single digits, right? So, but they can't. They're really bad at memorizing things. So every time they have to do 4 times 7, they've got to go 7. Okay, and they're adding up in their head. Okay, 7 plus 7 is 14, and they're just doing the addition every time. And it's a pain in the butt. the real big experts, there's some experts that like have memorized 4 times 7, and that's their thing. Anytime that someone come to me because I haven't memorized, I don't have to calculate it. And it takes a long time to get. And there's like some savant someplace that's like an autistic savant kind of, that's somehow done all the 7s. They know all the 7s, anything with 7. But so eventually in their communities, through all of their paperwork and their history, though someone realized that, you know what, we've done this a lot. Let's pull in all this big data of all of these times that we've done these multiplications, done it the hard way. And now I can create this little table, and now I can sort of see in front of me all the times table. And then I can just have this, he just makes a little thing. You just put in 2 numbers and it'll automatically output the product, right? It's sort of an automated time. It doesn't even count as a calculator. It's just now everybody in that community is smarter than the smartest autistic savant that I mentioned just a moment ago. Suddenly they have all this at their capability because it's a highly stereotyped thing for society to want to do. So now they don't have to spend all their energy to do all these little additions all the time. They can then push that down in their computational hierarchy, so to speak, and use it as a basic atom so that they can start combining them to do more complicated things. This is why we want our children to do the times tables in the first place, to memorize them. We don't want them to having to sit there and go 6 times 8, and they're like, 8. No, just memorize the damn thing. Yes, you don't understand it, but that's not the point. The point is not to understand it, it's to push it down, turn those into fundamental primitives such that you can combine them together to get more complicated things. And of course, mathematicians, what might be 7 levels up, and some mathematician expert has pushed that down to be a primitive for his or her field, right? So the same thing is why we want them to use calculators. We want them to be able to get rote about things that they themselves wouldn't get rote about. So in our world, rather there being experts that are experts on 4 times 7 and 4 times 8, and then the 7's expert autistic savant, we have a world with all of these experts where we're doing all of these rote things of all the space of stuff that we could be talking about. It's in fact a really small subset of that space of what humans in fact talk about. There's all this clumpings. And so all that we've done is just take big data, figure out what those clumpings are, and made it so that now when I want to do PR, I can become as fast as the typical PR person who in 3 minutes can write a quick PR piece because they've done it a million times, because they've developed all these tools where they have the constituent combinatorial resources just to go, I know the basic parts, like blah, 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 it's all together all at once. It's like 6 Lego pieces of the right perfect time.
If I get your what you're saying is you're not as concerned because you think AI can actually assist us in being more individualistic and kind of push away from the Borg.
It allows us, it radically expands in our ability to do computationally powerful things, because now I don't have to, if I want to go into some area, I can, and not everybody can be an expert in one of these fields. So suddenly I can be an expert in the basic things of those fields. I can use that as a basic, I don't have to think about it. That can just be a primitive at the bottom of my thinking. And then I can start combining these complicated things into deeply, much hierarchically higher levels than I could have ever gone. And then, in fact, any of us could have potentially gone once we're able to use this in an intelligent way. It's the same moral on crack for why we want our kids to learn the times table. And so that's what this sort of little small memory, little story is trying to get across.
What I want in my perfect world is for us to all be that individual person, that we know we can be that strong on our own, that we can do these great things on our own. So we don't require that, we can voluntarily, do little c communism if we want to, right? But not be forced into it, right? That we can voluntarily do things and surrender our rights if we want to voluntarily, versus being forced to, and believing that if I don't do it, the central repository people are going to not let me have a house, right? So I can do it for whatever way I want. With that in mind, I want to shift to your new book. I know I've been delaying it, but I wanted to wrap it up to get to this point. Your new book's on motorcycles versus cars, basically, if I'm kind of getting it right. An idea of motorcycles and how different and special it is. And the reason why it made me think is when I ran for governor, it's a true story. When I ran for governor of New York, I would go to many places in upstate New York. And upstate New York, for those you don't know, a lot of biker country, upstate New York. Not really New York City, upstate, a lot of bikers. So I'd go to some biker bars and biker clubs and meet people. Now I'm some city boy from Queens. And I would walk and people like, my team would be like, Larry, you sure you want to go in there? Looks kind of rough. So don't worry about it. It's fine. So I would go in. And you know what they would do? They would just talk to me. Like I'd go and sit outside by like a fire. Very often these biker bars would have a fire pit out back. I don't know why it's a common thing in New York. I don't know why it is. It's just a thing, I guess, right? So I'd go out and sit by the fire pit, and there'd be some guys sitting with their boots up saying, who the hell are you? And I would tell them, we would just talk. And as long as I was telling the most important thing, which was, I just want to leave you guys alone, they loved me. That was when I won them over, not by policy A or policy B or whether I was a libertarian or Republican or Democrat. That wasn't what won them over. It was always when I said, I want to leave you guys alone because I like your lifestyle of being on your own and personal responsibility and all those things. And I spoke about what you often see in biker groups. They're very often very loyal. They're very often very much individual, but voluntarily loyal. They're also about personal responsibility. That's why they don't like helmets, all those things, right? It's very common, right? That concept. And when you started speaking about that, I said, there's something special. So please, you are a motorcycle enthusiast. You think it's very special. And you think that generally you shouldn't wear a helmet. And I want to cover both of those. First, give me the motorcycle piece, then go to the helmet piece.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I've been riding for only 5 years. I'm 55 years old. I mean, later in life, sort of the kids were growing up in college kind of thing. And I now live in Miami, so I can ride every day. So it's been great. So I've really excelled, accelerated my how.
Are you part of a biker group or no?
No, but I go to some biker places where I get to talk to and meet a lot of folks. And
do you think my assessment is true or no?
Yeah. So I mean, I don't. I'm not certainly the reasons that I decided to ride. I can't per se say that was because I'm sort of a libertarian freedom defender, kind of always arguing for freedom. But it could well be the case that that's the kind of guy I am, and I just want a motorcycle in part for those reasons. And it occurred to me there is nothing that screams out freedom, and motorcycles scream out a lot of things, I suppose, but nothing really screams out freedom more than a motorcycle.
Yep.
So, I mean, the book is really about. The book is different than my other book. My other books are sort of answering age-old kinds of questions: why we have language, why we evolved color vision, why your eyes face forward, or all these sort of why we see illusions, all these sorts of. Here's a book that's not answering these sort of age-old kinds of questions, but it does. But it required all these kinds of all of the stuff that I've done for 30 years as a scientist was required to sort of unpack what it is about the motorcycle experience that makes it utterly unique, and it's the coolest invention ever is the subtitle. The motorcycle, the science behind the coolest invention ever. And I say that kind of as a joke, but obviously the phone that you're looking at right now has a zillion parts and it's a super amazing machine. But a motorcycle is just a big bike with an engine. Why should it have the aura that it does? Why does it have the place in our culture that it does? Why do people love it as much as they do? There's a sense in which when you divide by the small denominator, not very many parts in some sense, it makes it a huge story. So why a motorcycle is so amazing. So in the book, I cover many aspects of how you become one with the bike in a particular sense that you don't become with a car. And in fact, you become like a quadruped, like a wolf. You become more like a wolf in a very specific scientific sense that it has the dynamics and oneness of it. And the second chapter is sort of on what it is, the thrill of speed, because it's not really about speed, and unpacking exactly what that means perceptually and making real sense of that. And the third chapter is that not only do you become one with the bike and it's like an animal, but you actually emotionally signal like you normally emotionally signal, but you do it through the engine of the bike. And in fact, this is true for any manual transmission, although it's mostly moot these days for cars. You actually emotionally signal, and it's more moot for cars than for even manual transmission cars, because on a bike, you really want to signal those around you. You're keen to let them hear you so that you're safe. But that's one of the reasons motorcycles are so much fun when they go by. They're not boring lizards that will go by with a very different kind of quadruped kind of nature to it, which is sort of arms poking out sideways. It turns out to be the way that it's like. Whereas we're like more like deer or like horse. on a motorcycle, it's really like even though there's two wheels, it's more like the dynamics of a four-legged animal. But also the emotional expressiveness of bike. You just want to turn, you want to look at them. They're full dynamic beings when they go by. And why is that? Because as you can show that by virtue of having the different gears and different gear ratios at different speed, by having the clutch, you were able to have full two-dimensional space of motions, the same that we have. So when you're feeling it, and what you're actually feeling, you're actually not faking it, but no, it's actually tied to the behavior of the bike, and you can have the clutch in so you can bluff. You can make sounds that aren't in fact happening right now, and you can have the same kind of disengagement where you can sometimes be, signaling things that are not real, or choosing not to signal things that are real, like as you could pop the so there's all of these different kinds of dynamics, all which are found for the same functional social signaling reasons in bikes, and that's for humans. And everybody uses that as a motorcyclist, but these guys aren't the kind of guys that are going to unpack it, because you have to be a weird kind of cognitive scientist that's focused on exactly these sorts of things to be interested in doing. So I think anybody who's a motorcyclist is going to enjoy it, because they're going to go, oh yeah, that's why that, they're just, it's going to feel. And I think folks that don't motorcycle are still going to be amazed at what there is to the experience of a motorcycle, and I think it could motivate them to try.
So if you guys want that book, please feel free to check out the description in Facebook, on YouTube, and also on Rumble. And just head over to Amazon if you want to, and just put in Mark Changizi. You'll see.
Go to Barnes & Noble. Barnes & Noble.
There we go.
For some reason, Amazon doesn't have the physical book yet. It's taking too long. Barnes & Noble has all the books at Barnes & Noble.
There we go. Barnes & Noble. That will help you out right there. Just follow Mark on Mark Changizi on X if you want to. If you're listening only, again, it's MarkChangizi. Let me grab a couple people who are talking about their motorcycles. Greg says, my daughter got a Kawasaki Ninja, not too powerful, when she was 17/18. She still has it now in college. She's 21. A former coworker has one, and she helped my daughter with it. She has all the gear. They like the gear. So Greg, thank you for being a member. So that's something. Shelly says, I rode my 65 Yamaha for decades until someone stole my crankcase cover because it had the Yamaha emblem on it. Oh, I'm sorry about that. That sucks. That's terrible. Let me move to the next piece. This is the part about the helmets. And Mike brings up this. He asks, he says, Mark, have you had a bike accident yet? I and every biker I know have. It matters when you talk about helmets. So you want to answer that question, then go into the helmet piece, if you don't mind.
Well, I mean, I haven't had an accident yet, but look, these things are deeply. I've consulted as a scientist for a major motorcycle company for many years. We're exactly studying that, working on patents and new technology in helmets to try to augment the perception so that you're not having it dulled like most motorcycle helmets do. So one of the things that people don't seem to have a good intuition for is they think that as soon as first of all, they don't understand what it is that you're covering. In fact, even for masks, even for face masks during COVID, most people didn't understand that when you put a face mask on, you're blocking your vision. People don't realize that when you're walking and moving through the world, you actually see the ground below you. You, in fact, see your cheeks all the time in your far peripheral lower visual field. This is why football players put black underneath on their cheeks, because that way there's less reflection off their cheeks into their eyes, less glare.
Yep.
You
Baseball
are seeing your
too.
lower visual field, you're seeing the ground. And that optic flow is not interesting to see in terms of objects. It's interesting because that flow is what guides your behaviors and it helps you have the acrobatic behavior that you need to have. Masks block that. The typical motorcycle helmets invariably block that, and as well as some of your peripheral vision. So a lot of people have the intuition, well, yeah, but still, if you got into a car accident, you're going to be better off with a bigger, safer helmet. Well, yeah, if that was the argument, I would just put on one of those helmets from the 1920s that you go diving with, and there's a little hole like this, right? Clearly, that's a bad idea. At some point, you have too much helmet. You're restricting your senses too much that it becomes an inverted U. Now it's worse for you. Now, if I'm on the highway, I wear a helmet because the wind is so strong, I can't hear, so I need some. But for city driving, which is all a lane splitting constantly in Miami, you're constantly dealing with these, walls that are constantly moving, not trying to kill you, but not caring whether they do, right? You have to have all of your senses. And me as a perception scientist have studied exactly that's been my life for 25 years. I know all these senses that you need to have, and it's your auditory, it's your skin, it's your hair, all of your body. All of these things are used by your body, and it's so I think that it's unreasonable to assume that more gear is always safer. There are circumstances where it becomes safer, but in other circumstances it's not. And it's not about safety always, right? If there was this has been on even today on Twitter, it was going around that it's 29 times more dangerous to ride a motorcycle than a car in terms of the number of people injured per 100,000 miles or whatever it might be.
Yep.
Now, first of all, motorcyclists pull in a whole different demographic of speed kids, like these 18-year-old, 25, which cars does not bring that in. And so if you take out those kinds of people, and a lot of them don't even have licenses, you radically reduce that number. But let's just set that aside. Because that same graph, it shows it not on log, it's just linear. So it's this huge graph for motorcycles and a much smaller one for cars. But then it also shows buses and subway and things like this as it goes down. And you realize, well, in fact, if you make it logarithmic, you realize that it's not just one big long curve, because there's still 2 orders of magnitude. There's a 100-fold difference between the buses and cars. It turns out there's 66 times greater risk to drive than taking the bus. So why are you driving a car? How dare you drive a car when there's 66 times greater risk? Why don't you take a bus? There's always a way to get there on the bus. Well, there's lots of reasons. One, buses are boring. It's terrible. There's lots of practical reasons and lots of joy reasons for why you prefer to drive. It's not about minimizing your risk in life. It's about optimizing your life. And that has to include the risks, the conveniences that it affords, and for me, as well as the joy. And for motorcycles, there's not just joy, but there's the conveniences. In a city like Miami, which might take 45 minutes to get from one end to another in a car, in much of the day, it takes me 15 minutes because I'm going through whatever that traffic is. I'm like a knife through hot butter. So the whole city has been opened up. That's super convenient. So all of these things have to be considered, and it's amazing the extent to which people are very one-dimensional in their determinations.
So I got to go over to Rumble. I'm getting a bunch of Rumble rants. Let me grab some of them. This is from Mr. Just Because, aka the lunatic libertarian. He says, most are scared. Thank you for the $20, by the way. No one knows mechanical objects more than I. My father broke the sub 6.99 seconds in the quarter mile. Larry, I'm going to take over the Department of Transportation. Your fellow lunatic libertarian. Okay, I guess that's good. I think he's on your side, Mark, because he goes on to say, he's talking about Mike, who asked that question. He says, helmets and hand devices, all a false sense of security. I love liberty. In a sky suit over 100 miles per hour, no projection on the ground, just saying. And he then says, the next thing with his next Rumble rant, I'm stalking Larry on Rumble, thank you, for a free speech inquiry for a minimum of an hour together, live. Fine, I'll put you on the show. I tried once before, Lunatic, and you said no, but you didn't have time. Anyway, I'll make it work. Anyway, my point being, I think, Mark, what Lunatic is saying is he agrees with you. He thinks that this is a false insecurity. You should enjoy it. And I got to tell you, there's a part of what you're saying that I really get, in that you have to be willing to not just be safe. You have to be willing to be as safe as you feel comfortable, but also to risk to have a better life in whatever way you want to have that better life, whether that's motorcycle riding, or for myself, joining the Marine Corps, or whatever the case may be, right? Doing the things that you want to do that, are better for you. I think that's true.
Yeah. And the risk itself is part of the joy. So for example, if you sat in a modern simulator such that, and for one side effect is that, there is no simulator that simulates what's going on in a motorcycle. And then I'll get back. The simulators, the best simulator in the world is just like these bikes that are at the arcades, where when you want to go left, the whole thing leans left. But when you're leaning left on one of these bikes at the arcade, which is super cool to play if you're a kid, well, you're about to fall off to your left. You're like riding a little bucking bronco. On a motorcycle at speed, when you tilt, gravity is still at all times going through your spine into the seats and in through the wheels of the. Instead, it's actually like sitting on the couch at home playing a crappier motorcycle game where you're just holding still and the bike is always vertical and the world changes. that's actually what it's like. No, like sometimes my wife is just exhausted at the end of the day, or she's not feeling very well, and she's sitting at the back. And if she was in the car without a seatbelt, she'd be slamming into me and slamming into the wall.
Right.
But no, she's absolutely stay. As long as she's not like just limp, she's gonna fall off, which she could just fall off. It's like the bike is holding still. There's no side to side whip. There's forward and back if I accelerate too quickly, but there's no side to side whip. You are in what appears to be, once you're at speed, in a gravity bubble, where literally you are the center of the universe and everything else moves relative to you. And it's your weight, your 700-pound bike becomes weightless. Whereas once you're at slow speed or stop, the whole thing is impossible to move. It's terrible.
Right.
But so there's a whole experience that just comes from from speed and the weightlessness, which is amazing. Now, what was I going to get to after that? I can't remember now.
It's okay. Lunatic says one more thing. He says, life is a risk, my friend. Combat to
That's
walking
right.
down the stairs.
That's right.
That's true,
Simulators,
yes.
to the point, simulators can't give you that. Only the reality will give you that. And if simulators, my main point there was that if simulators could get you everything, you're sitting in a simulator and there's the wind, they do everything. You'd still say, this is a pretty cool device, you'd say, but part of the thrill is that you really went past a truck and your head really was close to hitting it. right. You really were going fast past real things that would hurt real bad if it happened. And you cannot take that away from what the experience is. The same for skiing, same for any fun sport that gets you jived up, is because you are enjoying real dangers and handling them. That's part of what makes it brilliant. Yeah.
So I want to go back. Maybe people came in late or whatever the case may be. People are asking me, can you, in your own words, define what you think woke is? And also, can you define, most people kind of know what left woke is, or at least they think they do. Can you define what, in your own words, what you would say, give an example of what right woke might be?
Well, I mean, the folks on the woke right appear to be, there's a whole bunch of symmetrical kinds of things, which I wish I had the beams with me. But I mean, the one kind of symmetry that I already talked about earlier at the start was this kind of propensity to believe in conspiracy theories in a derogatory sense. But the woke left is often explaining all the good that comes to the world from some kind of centralized government of just the right kind, of a very paternalistic kind of thing. Whereas the woke right is more conspiracy theory driven in the more traditional sense that we use that word in a derogatory sense, explaining bad things by some evil centralized thing that's controlling things. But there's another kind of symmetry between them as well. And they're opposites, but and I'm not saying that woke is necessarily the perfect word. I have other people that say they've come up with just basic. I don't know whether woke is this, but they're symmetrical and opposite and sort of moving towards authoritarianism. Authoritarianism, once one was called woke for a long time, I'm happy just to call the other because I see these symmetries. And it's stuck. So I'm not defending per se that the word woke has to be it, but there's all these symmetries that makes me want us to keep it. The other is that the far progressive woke left believes they're both wrong about human nature. The woke left believes there is no human nature. They believe that you're infinitely plastic and you can be molded as arbitrarily to become whatever they need you to be for their kind of notion of their grand authoritarian scheme to help everybody, right? So folks who've argued there's human nature have been attacked by the left. Sociobiology by E.O. Wilson. He was a very far left person, but he was attacked and raked over the coals by the leftists in academia because he dared argue that psychology and sociobiology was driven by instincts, by our nature, by the animals' natures and human natures. So the left has the wrong notion of human nature because human nature isn't that. The human natures were filled with instincts. Sure. We are just as much filled with instincts as all the animals. We don't have this plasticity just to become something. To the extent that we seem plastic, it's because cultural evolution shapes stuff to harness our existing instincts. So the only reason we can read, like I mentioned before, is not because we evolved suddenly, we're plastic enough. No, if you show me barcodes, no matter how much time you train up kids on barcodes, they're useless. You have to culturally evolve writing to tap into what our non-plastic brains are already good at.
Right.
Now, the right also has the wrong notion because they believe that we are have a human nature, but they believe that it comes from, that it's fixed, that it comes from God, that it's God given, that there's a particular notion of what it is to have a culture and to be a particular way. They don't understand that the reason that we have the kinds of modern cultural capabilities that we have are because these things are constantly dynamically changing through the complex free expression. Because they're often hooked. Well, our culture, that culture is a trash culture, and this, the other cultures over there, they're just terrible. No, like there are some worse cultures than others. I'm not saying they're all equal. No, there's definitely worse ones than others, but they're constantly dynamically changing, and it's that dynamic evolution of culture that itself has created the humans that we are today. The human 2.0s, because human 1.0s didn't have language, they didn't have writing, they didn't have music. They were just biologically a lot smarter, very significantly smarter than chimpanzees, but still qualitatively pretty darn similar. Quantitatively smarter, but not astronomically smarter like we are today. This is the result of cultural evolution. And so a lot of the folks on the right typically have a very strong cultural belief that God gave us all of these sorts of ways that we are now. No, you have to be open-minded about cultural change, but you don't have to be multicultural, but you should be open-minded. This is a dynamic process that's constantly in flux.
So now looking at right now, the way America is going, the way the world is going, do you have any predictions for the future, good or bad? Do you have like, I think this is going to happen or this is not going to happen? Is AI going to actually be good for us? Is it not? Or any of those things? Do you think something's going to change? Do you have a feeling about the future now?
Well, I'm more optimistic about the AI stuff. I mean, but as I mentioned earlier, I'm more worried about the, what made COVID bad, and it was a kind of totalitarianism that we saw. Now, typically, totalitarian situations like that happen to, it's just the Chinese people. It happens to them, and the Chinese, they're faraway culture, so we sort of explain it because they're different than us. And then the Iranians are this, Islamic nation, but totally. So it had, and the Germans, well, they're Western, just like it. But anyway, they're severe people. We come up with bullcrap post hoc explanations why it couldn't happen to us. But with COVID, it obviously happened anywhere, and of course it can happen to any group at all. And it happened worldwide because of the connection of the internet and how the world was going. So now when these sorts of mass hysterias hit, they don't just fuck over one unfortunate country and then we all sort of say, oh, that's lucky. That would never happen to us. It only happens to us screwed up people. No, it can happen to all of us. And now when it happens to any of us, it could happen to all of us. So there's a kind of, and there's also a similar kind of worries that, it's well known that if you have a bunch of islands, like an archipelago, Darwin's studying speciation, you have a bunch of different islands, then you find much more diversity as when you go from bigger islands have greater, more diverse, but the total accumulation of diversity across those different separated islands is huge compared to if you have just all of those things congealed into one similar landmass, let's say. We are all one similar land mass since 1995 or so. You get the feeling that the music that we hear, and I don't think this is just me getting old, I feel like the music is kind of more of the same, and I like the music, that's fine, but one doesn't feel like there's these massive diversifications that you kind of might have expected with these micro niches that you saw maybe the web would allow. No, it kind of just feels like you're missing the diversity that happens through spatial, geographical separation that was sort of naturally there.
If you look at the youngsters, I think would say you're right, because many of the youngsters now are looking in the past for music.
Yeah, there is this all redoing versions of the old stuff, which often sounds really cool, but I feel like we're missing the genuine orthogonal new directions of music that could have happened and can only happen when there's these spatial congregations of separately evolving things. And that's related to this uniformity undermines diversity, an explosion of cultural diversity, and it also makes these mass social manias that can happen across the earth much more dangerous when they do happen.
That sounds like what you're saying is that we have an increased chance of, say, a dark ages, that we've increased the odds of a dark ages, meaning that if we're not as diverse, there's not as much of a chance for us to have change. And then if something bad happens, it can affect the entire world and make us all go dark. Am I
Yeah,
misreading you?
Yeah, that's right. Oh, I'm sorry. There's a fragility. There's a much greater increased fragility. Now, I mean, I do take Steven Pinker's uh, book on violence, the better nature of our
Greater
angels.
angels or something.
Better,
Yeah, I read the book.
so
Yep.
there's a pretty strong whether it's shorter scales or longer scales, and many different ways of looking at it. From which does show, violence does seem to be at the in some sense reducing. There's been
Yep.
cultural evolution over time, which has come up with ways of reducing the amount of violence. Hopefully, that still continues onward. But again, there's the qualitative change to it being many human populations to one. Does create a different kind of math that's going on, a fragility that both to lack of diversity and susceptibility to illness, mass illness that we wouldn't have had before.
There we go. Let me grab a couple of these Rumble rants if I could. Again, Lunatic, you just keep throwing them out. You got stuff to say. He says, having a simulator, sorry, but there are simulators for millions of dollars with wind tunnels. Are we saying they have some with wind tunnels? You can do that. But he says, real life makes adrenaline junkies, combats the ultimate drug, drag racing, free climbing, all release the same brain reaction. Everyone's triggers what needs to be trapped into. What the point I think he's bringing up is that they do have more simulators that people want to try to achieve, but that life can make us an adrenaline junkie. And I get that because I remember being in the Marine Corps. When I joined the Marine Corps, most of my senior leadership were Vietnam vets. And that was the year when I joined, it was right after the Vietnam War. And most of my senior leadership were Vietnam vets. And many of them had gone back to Vietnam more than once. And for those you don't know, you never had to go more than once. They sent you once and you never had to go again. Anyone who went again was a volunteer. That happened again in Afghanistan and Iraq, right? People would go and then again do it again. They would go back, they'd volunteer to go back to Iraq or volunteer to go back to Afghanistan, knowing what would happen. Some of them would see their friends get injured or wounded, and they would still go back again voluntarily, not because they were ordered to. The first time you get ordered. After that, you volunteer if you want to do it again. And there were guys who go back 3-4 tours. We just go back again and again and again. I think there's some truth to that.
Yeah, I'm not sure that I certainly there is an adrenaline junkie part of the daily life when you're riding, but I certainly feel like the experience and the joy of having a city at your disposal in a different kind of way, navigating the city in a different kind of way. It is, like one of the fun of being a boater, and I've never been a boater, but you live in this, you might be a boater in Miami, you live in a negative space. Like when they want to travel from some place to another, restaurant to another, of course, they're not using any of the road. They have like a whole different opposite space they live in. Airplanes, same kind of thing. They kind of, in each of these spaces, these negative spaces that we don't usually participate in are dangerous. They afford capabilities, but they also have dangers of their own. And there's a negative space that we motorcyclists ride in, even in the cities, and scooters as well, because the spaces that you think of as not existing as a car are all there for us. And of course, these spaces are often dynamically changing depending on the cars that are there and the gaps that are there. So it's this constantly dynamically changing negative space that we participate in is just one of the dozens of kinds of joys that being a motorcyclist affords. So it's more than just the junkie part of it. It's not just the speed. Yeah.
I got Mike doesn't think you're right with your woke right. He says, wrong on defining the right. Mark is saying religious right is all the right. Yes, left looks at check boxes. People are their characteristics in grouping only. Mike, I disagree with you completely. The funny thing is, Mike is woke right. He doesn't want to admit it. What you defined is him. The guy who's saying this right now, he's literally that. He's look in the mirror, Mike. Dude, you are exactly what he said. I hear Mike comes on the show. And when he's on the show, he'll say things like the Chinese this, the libs this, the Dems that. Literally woke right. You described him perfectly. And he's like, no, it's very funny. I think you're wrong, Mike. I think Mark's on the money with it. The woke right piece is everything bad is done by the Dems or the libs or the whatever.
I think that actually, well, let me defend this other. His name is not there. But
his name is Mike.
Okay, let me defend Mike. I think woke right is definitely more than just being tribal and on the right. The woke rights are different than your historical folks on the right. The woke rights are often, they're much more likely to think that 9/11 was a conspiracy by the CIA, or much more likely the Mossad. They are very pro-Putin. They think that the moon landing was faked. They think there's typically a whole suite of conspiracy theories that come with it. They think, of course, the pandemic was all a planned 20-year thing. There's no such thing as virus. These are clusters of associated kind of beliefs. There's all of these things, and the Jews are usually at the ends of all of these. This is, and of course, on the woke left, they're often very anti-Jew for sort of different. It's different, but sort of opposite sorts of reasons. I think the typical person on the right who's just tribal ain't woke right at all. There's tons of tribalism on both sides. We all, I yell at them, try not to be as tribal, blah, blah. That's a standard kind of thing. But this rise of the woke right is fundamentally different. They are, I think, are.
But all the conspiracies you said, I'm like, like there was, like I was like, maybe, like I didn't think any of those were crazy. Maybe I'm woke right too, Mike. Maybe me and you are woke right, because I was like, maybe. I'm just saying, I'm being forward, Mike.
Yeah.
So I don't know. My point being, I look at someone who just always thinks that the other. Here's where I see the concept of being woke in that regard. It's having no empathy for the other. Right? It's just having no empathy for the other. And if you're left woke, every person who's not left woke is some horrible Nazi or terrible person who's a fascist, and they're all bad and they're all together. And if you see people in woke left, they assume that every person who's on the right works together. They're always lockstep, even though they're not. But that's what they always believe. Oh no, the right is lockstep, and they're all under the leader Trump or whatever. And everyone who's woke right is the exact opposite. Oh no, the left is all exactly the same. They're all lockstep, and they're all under whatever, Soros or whoever is the bad guy of the day. They're all under Soros and all that. That's kind of how I see it, but maybe I'm wrong.
Yeah, I reserve the word to go as it's really, to me, a subset of those that are on the right and on the left. The left, those that are woke left, there's plenty of people that I know that would think that I don't like Trump, blah, blah, but they're not necessarily going to be out there demonstrating for the thing of the day, whether it's trans, let's say, this week or whatever it might be. They're constantly out there virtue signaling for these crazy, absurd kind of positions that show how righteous they are. So I think there is a different kind of role as they kind of fallen towards this authoritarianism than just your traditional person that's on the left and a pain in the ass, or on the right who's a pain in the ass in terms of being too tribal. But yeah.
Daniel's on my side. He says any name calling for the other side is woke. I like that. He says, but then what if you call both sides names? Then you become cool like me, Daniel. See, that's how that works. There we go. I do like that. All right, let me grab a couple more of these from Rumble. Lunatic, you got to stop spending all your money, man. Thank you for the $1. He says, I'm a descendant of giants of the north. Also, the conquered sovereign Taino. I am the world. Awesome. I'm glad. He goes on and says, bring in the Rumble rants. And then he says, psychopaths per CIA podcasters. We understand the brain better than you think. Grand Theft Auto has the same brain response. Wow. Okay. He's got a lot of stuff to say tonight, but I think what he's saying is that that I guess adrenaline push, people also get that from video games, and I think that's true. You do get it from video games too.
Well, obviously, yes. All of these games are thrilling and have facets of the real experience, but are of course missing other facets.
There we go. So before we wrap this up, Mark, anything you want to bring up? Say that I missed something you wanted to cover?
No, just go get a copy of Motorcycle Mind and get yourself a motorcycle.
There we go. Get Motorcycle Mind and get a motorcycle. Guys, tonight I am going to be on Grumbling Media tonight at 10 p.m. Tomorrow I'll be on at 7 p.m. So I will be on 2 shows. So if you guys want to come and see me, that'd be great. If you want to follow Mark, please follow him on Twitter/X at Mark Changizi. That is, again, if you're listening, MARK, not C, and Changizi. Guys, once this is over, please do me a favor. Put in the chat, once it's over, put in the chat if you think you are either woke right or woke left. Put that in the chat after this is over. I will see you guys very soon.